Hi everyone, these are the opening comments to begin answering Lexa's questions about her poem and to posit some other questions as we go forward in the final workshop. So this is a really lovely poem. I'm really interested in a lot of the images that are happening. Lex, your primary question was how do we interpret it? So the best thing I can do is actually just take us through how I'm reading the images as they progress. It opens look love up in the dictionary, which I really like, particularly followed by withering white picket fences, blossoming fertilized garden. The idea that when you look love up in the dictionary, we're not stuck to someone moralizing, someone telling us what the dictionary definition would be. Instead, we get this set of images. I really like that. And the images take us far away from just a book. The images themselves are really interesting because withering white picket fences, withering is such a great word, particularly next to white, and also because that image, white picket fence, that's the sort of maybe suburban middle class heterosexual, like, classic image of what love might achieve for us. Like we might get a family and a white picket fence and a house and all of that. So to say withering, automatically there's some question about the state of that dream or the state of that house. And withering is a great word because it's almost an aesthetic, because a thing withers when it dries out. And wood and a fence can certainly do that. We get a picture of a dilapidated white fence, but usually we use wither for, like a plant that's been, drying in the sun just over the course of a day even. So I think that's really interesting. Blossoming fertilized garden is interesting as well because really a blossoming garden is the abundance. It's the thing that we would think of. It is the thing we would think of, but unchallenged, right? It's like there's this abundance and this growing garden. Fertilized is interesting because, on the one hand, it's nourished, it's fed. On the other hand, what feeds a garden is often like the dead bodies of other plants. So maybe there's also some underlying kind of question or challenge to how things grow. Blood red roses spill out in the yard and strangling the others. Obviously, again, the red roses, the classic sort of Valentine's image. In this case, they are abundant, but they're strangling the others. I think it's interesting that the others aren't named. It could be other kinds of roses, white roses, yellow roses, or it could be other plants, or it could also just be others, other people. Like there's some aspect of this image of love that we have that stifles the others. Maybe just the other kinds of love, too. The first thing you see. That's an interesting line. It kind of dangles for me. I'm not sure what to make of it yet. I like the idea of it, being that the thing that you see is something, but there's at least three images above it, so I'm not sure what the first thing is for one, like logically. I don't know what it is. And then the you just seems to be a generic you. And it's the only you that appears in the whole poem. And I think that puts some pressure on it. So I have questions about that line. Satin sheets, hot and rough against the skin, panic taking over the heart and mind, depression spikes in the lost heart. This is an interesting shift because the first stanza is all outside imagery, the yard, and then suddenly we're inside, presumably a bedroom. Again, we have satin sheets, which is like classic romance, Valentine. And if you've ever felt them, they're slick and they're soft and they're often very cool. So hot and rough is again challenging and underlying what that is. And if you were having some kind of panic attack, that could certainly feel that way. And this lost heart, this seems really key here because the heart could be lost because it had everything above. It had the white picket fence, it had the fertilized garden and the satin sheets and the other, and it lost them, either from death or maybe some misapprehension of what love should have been, and then the relationship didn't work out because the people couldn't make it. I think it's open to interpretation. It also could just be a lonely person, a person lost in depression and loneliness without those kinds of love. There's a mirage in their minds, seeds planted in an abused garden of Eden, and cigarettes had smoked this far. I really like this stanza. It's really lovely. The mirage in their minds, again, basically, to me, commenting on the mirage of what love is supposed to look like and the suburban ideal family thing above, like that's what the mirage is. And again, instead of you, we have their. So there's some pronoun question here about like who's talking and who we're talking about or to. Seeds planted in an abused Garden of Eden. I really like this. Of course, the garden harkens back to the garden above, but it's also Eden. And I like that it's abused because, you know, Eden, we get the Adam and the Eve, the man and the woman, having innocence, losing innocence through gaining of knowledge, particularly carnal knowledge. But here it's not the people that are abused, it's the garden that's abused. And I find that really interesting. I haven't made a complete understanding in my mind of what that means yet, but I'm really intrigued by it. I think it's really rich. Cigarettes add smoke to this fire is a great line because nowhere in the poem prior to this do cigarettes or smoke or fire appear. There's nothing that really would make room for them, but it works because this person who is panicking and having depression, it's pretty easy, an easy stretch to imagine them smoking and, you know, partaking of whatever other, you know, drugs or whatever during their depression and anxiety. And then the cigarette is the one that makes room for the smoke and the fire as an image. But then the fire stands for metaphor for sort of like the mess of everything that's been happening above. So I like that line a lot. Beautiful children made from the ugly past, seeking out truth in genetics, and the actual truth is the sound of the ocean, tidal waves moving us forward. I love the ending, I really do. I'm not sure where the image comes from, and I'm also not sure why it works. It might be because we've ranged from the dictionary to the garden, to the satin sheets, to the Eden, to the fire, that maybe the ocean, it's easy for, you know, there's room enough in the poem for it because we haven't been grounded in one place already. And I also like the sentiment, the idea that like any truth that we think we know, any knowledge we seek out, abusing the garden maybe, is ultimately, I don't know, it's kind of like words are but wind, right? It's like this noise, but it's noise that's not as meaningful as the noise of the sound of the ocean. And just like the sheer tidal wave of time. Where I struggle is seeking out truth in genetics. It's a really interesting line. And genetics, of course, if we're talking about the Garden of Eden, we're talking about men and women procreating, we're talking about white picket fences. There's room to talk about genetics maybe, but the word itself is so scientific. And it suggests, you know, a genetic condition, like seeking out truth in genetics. Like we're trying to find an answer in, I don't know, a scientific explanation of our genes. And that in and of itself is an interesting concept to negate, but it doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the poem to my understanding at this point. So that's my understanding so far. I think mostly it critiques standard stereotypical images and ideas of what love looks like and how it functions. And that there's something that we don't know or something that we can't know, and that the real truth is, I don't know, something bigger, something that moves us along without our working on it. Yeah, I think I still have questions, but I think a lot of lines work really well. That's my interpretation. Questions I have for other people would be, I guess, where do they see the things I'm questioning fitting in? What about the first thing you see? What about the lost heart? Which isn't too much of a question for me, but what's your interpretation? And what's the genetics? And what's the ocean, I guess? Those would be my questions for others. And so if you interpret it this way or another way, you know, how clear do you think that is? All right, thanks, Lex.